society operates in certain narrative patterns, some more prevalent than others. The more ancient these patterns are, the more likely they are to hold truth. These often contain insights that transcend cultural boundaries and serve as a window to humanity. Take, for instance, the sword-wielding warrior who slays the dragon in pursuit of the princess, or serving as her protector. Countless Disney stories and the climax of the Book of Revelation fit this motive. Whether the princess represents a kingdom or a damsel in distress, the narrative is ever present because it is non-arbitrary. It reflects the truth we live day to day. The dragon represents the trials and tribulations one must face in pursuit of a noble cause, the princess. Us men, we require dominion, whether it be in a form of a career, a business, or a family. Thus, a society must assist the men to chase this noble cause, lest they chase nothing at all. The former builds a society, the latter is untenable and leads to civilizational failure. This is the case in South Africa, where the welfare steps in ahead of the prince, leaving him with nothing to conquer and therefore no purpose. Now, integrating young men into society is a task that makes the difference between heaven and hate, a functional and a non-functional society. Jules Marquette states that the majority of South African prisoners are in the age of 18 to 25, raising the necessity of this video of KZN Police Commissioner Mkhwananzi, asserting why more attention and direction should be given to young men.
Our perpetrators, Premier, we felt we must put this light so that we can identify what is our problem, because we need to analyze what is the problem. The problem we have, you forgive me on this, but this is not me talking, these are the stats. We have a problem with the black man in South Africa.
Although warranted sensation may be sensed in the Commissioner's statement, it remains true that improper and unguided integration into society leads to the prevalence of social deviance, such as, but not limited to, crime amongst young men. Now, criminologists Larry J. Siegel and John H. Shedd, they go further to claim that transition away from a deviant way of life is through transition into social life, citing the acquiring of jobs, the forming of a network of social relationships, and marrying a partner who does not share your deviant tendencies is one of the central reasons for the reduction of deviant behavior like promiscuity, dishonesty, or criminal behavior. These communal stimuli of crime, such as social responsibility and plenty, but often fluid social networks characterized by young people, leads to more engagement in deviant acts, these being true even among young men. In gangs, as the Institute of Security Studies claim that most often young men do not retain a permanent affiliation with gangs, demonstrating that having weak and a lack of interdependent social bonds leads to a more careless way of life.
And then there's people showing me it's the first definite 27 we met, and he looks like a 12-year-old child.
The lack of strong social bonds, perpetuated by the values of this nation, are cemented through the welfare state that subsidizes the incompetence of these young men. While South African youth participation is difficult, the effects of it are much more prevalent in the South African man, exacerbated by the record-breaking unemployment, the idle, duty-less man, who is used to justify the ever-expanding welfare state. Now, the welfare state is a political system in which a government undertakes policies and programs to maintain the well-being of resident citizens. Douglas Wilson of Canon Press goes further than merely stating that the welfare state increases dependence, but that it subsidizes irresponsibility. To subsidize is to support an organization or an activity financially. Take, for instance, the Integrated School Health Policy of 2012, which outlines the distribution of contraceptions in schools. This shows that our government, in the name of welfare, has had an increasingly immoral attitude to sex, which allows for men who are averse to responsibility to strive.
The Provincial Health Department recorded over 4,000 teenagers that gave birth to health facilities between the month of April and June this year. Over 3,600 of those teenagers are between the ages of 15 and 19 years old.
Now, grace should be given. The South African Democratic Government was founded after the sexual revolution. In a world where American entertainment showcases softcore physical intimacy as a way of establishing a couple, in effect leading to a population desensitized around the issue of sex, and a government encouraging multiple sexual orientations in the name of freedom and contraceptions, in the name of health. Now, because South Africa is the world center of HIV and AIDS, it has been pressured to find ways to stop the spreading of these viruses. However, integrating the termination of pregnancy into this broader movement has been a grave misstep. Chesterton was right. Mixing all colors from the human paint box does not create a rainbow, but makes something like mud. Having children who don't live with their father or don't know their father or know the wrong father. A familyless culture which begets government-headed households. In doing so, they have subsidized fatherlessness, promiscuity, and carelessness, which is the golden recipe for disaster, resulting to the unguided induction into manhood, which leads to these absurd crime statistics. Now, us suburbans have soon realized that the primitive Sotho, Xhosa, and Ndebele cultures of sending boys to the fields and mountains might be onto something, with the right execution, of course. The taking up of responsibility of parenthood serves well in building communal bonds and becoming a man. Traditionally, parents, especially the father, were seen as the primary providers for a child. However, this responsibility is increasingly being taken up by the state in the form of social grants, which has proved to be a spanner in the works for this mother-father holy family. The researchers behind the study, the effect of welfare participation, remark, we find that welfare participation reduces the likelihood of transitioning to marriage, but only while the mother receives the benefits. Once the mother leaves the welfare, past receipts has little effect on marriage. Government welfare programs unintentionally weaken interpersonal reliance and self-determination, which are crucial for forming strong family bonds. Now, with the 47% of the population receiving social grants, the delay in marriage has become a permanent feature in the South African society. For modern solutions to the ancient problem of poverty has made this family dynamic impossible for a large chunk of the South African population. I mean, sure, children should be protected by the government as one of the less abled in our society. However, it is essential that this protection begins from the father before extending to the government. This universal truth has been revitalized poorly through the red pill movement, but effectively through the figures such as the Canadian and clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson.
Fatherless boys are much more likely to be in prison. They're much more likely to drop out of school. They're much less likely to attain gainful employment. They're much less likely to be reliable marital partners. And so it's a cascading effect. Your father, if he sticks around, provides an example of long-term, other-focused commitment across all the ups and downs of life.
I say this because there's a detrimental effect for the lack of a patriarchal head, proven by a 1998 study conducted in Inanda as part of the Family Preservation Pilot Project, which revealed that many young males who encountered legal issues often lacked strong social relationships with either their biological father or their stepfather. Regrettably, this absenteeism initiates a cycle, which is subsidized by government involvement and bad social engineering, which causes a reduction in the social institution that creates stable men. And as mentioned by criminologist Larry J. Siegel and John H. Shelley, is key to the transitioning out of a socially deviant lifestyle. Now, this is why this happens. Some politicians are insisting on infantizing their population by not addressing the reasons why the grants are needed in the first place. This accelerates the purpose crisis, which facilitates the nihilism that fuels social deviance. After the fall of the Soviet Union, conservatives, especially in America, embraced the notion that the ideological evolution had essentially reached its conclusion, believing that the foundations of freedom and liberty were now unshaken and would never ever again be challenged, and that freedom, liberty, and justice would never be subordinate to government again. Now, in the context of South Africa, though, judging by the popularity of the MK and the EFF, this is far from the truth, and this presidential address shows that certain leaders attach the wrong moral obligations to the South African grant system they extend. Crash platitudes such as give a man a fish and this situation must be considered. And for it to gain further momentum, it should be extended. So, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. But give him a fish every day and then he will be fed, but never satisfied. Some leaders refuse to see this, which is why we find Ramaphosa's claim of 350 being an
investment in the future
concerning. Our president is a self-proclaimed socialist, and receiving without contributing is the very cornerstone of his ideology. The man who goes to work to fulfill his task for the sake of his family and community is not as seen as undertaking a noble task among Marxists. This virtue is not present in the Marxists, in which the pseudo-socialist African national is a form of enslavement. The slave is sold once and for all. The proletarian must sell himself daily and hourly. Karl Marx. In wage labor and capital. Therefore, there is no surprise that this ideology attracts religiously entitled people who want to hunt arbitrarily in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, and criticize after dinner. The mysterious land of no constraints. In this address, the president addresses the nation that the grant increases the population reliance on the state.
Many people tend to dismiss this and say we are establishing a dependent society. We are investing in our people and investing in their future as well.
Reliance on this purpose is not bad merely because it deprives the virtue of labor, as Cecil John Rawls would put it, but because it perpetuates poverty. The virtue of labor, which is the dignity that one bestowed by them pulling a weight in the advancement of their society through labor, whether physical or not. Proverbs 20:29 verse 30. The glory of young men is their strength. Ask the ancients who depicted their hunts on the cave walls. By removing the crucial step of securing resources through employment, we risk fostering social and criminal deviance, while also undermining the moral responsibility to commitment, which is crucial to manhood. Jordan Peterson states that the Gini coefficient, which is the measure of the relative distribution of resources amongst people in a given area, is an accurate measurement of criminal activity. True, however, when we assess the prescription of the cause of crime in another cultural setting, something peculiar happens. Now, Jordan Peterson is a Westerner who lives in a nation with a largely crumbling Christian foundation. The value system of his nation is one which would characterize the social or cultural materialism, which is the tendency to prioritize and place importance on physical possessions, wealth, and material goods, often equating them with success. Now, this leads to the adoration of wealth by those who possess it and resentment from those who do not. Now, in contrast, the Zulu Empire was ruled through a system of patronage, which required the centralization of resources to the throne. Warriors would be given rewards by the king, which was one of the ways of climbing the hierarchical ladder of the kingdom. As a result, the closest to the king would often be the beneficiaries of this system. Combined with the hereditary appointment of chiefs and kings, social mobility was largely inaccessible for the common Zulu man, who often had to give tribute through endowment to the Inkosi, the king. Now, if we were to measure the cattle-based Gini coefficient, we would likely observe a very high level of inequality within this kingdom. Despite this, kings like Shaka did not face rebellion, largely due to the great respect he commanded within his realm. While fear of retribution may have deterred potential revolutionaries, it is important to note that many of the warriors vastly outnumbered Shaga's and his elites. One of the reasons for the lack of insurrection was that inequality was viewed through a cultural hierarchical lens, rather than an economic one. Simply put, the king was loved by his people. Another reason was the military community, which managed to keep the men, the young men especially, in societal content. Now, the princess was the Zulu Empire, the dragon were the rival kingdoms, and the young men who were discouraged into marriage would do anything to protect her. Thus, the comparison between Peterson's nation or Peterson's society and the communal cultural value system of Shaga's Zulu Empire reveals the transcendental difference in how inequality is viewed, perceived, and managed. Which is why what we are concerned with within the House of Yetibe is the cultural, societal, and communal elements that lead people into crime. As Emily Durkheim said, I quote, "If the individual is to be made a good citizen, he must be made part of the community. And if that community does not exist, he is doomed to be a source of disorder. If the men of the kingdom were not communalized, it's simple. They would start a rebellion. For example, Shaga. Therefore, for this problem to be adequately addressed, Yetibe believes that dispelling of the devil's advocate notion that poverty causes crime should occur before these problems, because the forces of crime and poverty act in tandem. Because just as relative resources lack may fuel crime, it does not necessarily have to. Africa is in a tricky position. Our men and women are facing John Verweek's meaning crisis. Without family, without work, without life. We are a democratic nation. To criticize a government is to criticize its people. When we insist on descending our humanity deeper into warm hands of the government, then we will not find it when we realize that we have lost it. Government dependents who have structured their life around the system should be shown compassion. Men who do not have the privilege of providing for their kids should be pitied, but only to a point because democratic mass was dug with democratic hands. We can choose to forge ahead, or we can look into the future without a stubborn mind. It is here, gentlemen, that we close our statement as Yedibe. Good day.